Mozart composed his first symphony at 6. Zuckerberg built Facebook at 19. By the time you've heard these stories 1,000 times, you've started doing the math on yourself, and the math feels bad. Van Gogh didn't start painting seriously until he was 27. He had 10 years before he died. Those 10 years produced over 900 paintings. 3 of them are in the Louvre. Colonel Sanders was 65 years old when he franchised his first Kentucky Fried Chicken. Not started, franchised. The version that became a global empire. The math you've been doing on yourself isn't wrong because you should feel better. It's wrong because it's measuring the wrong thing. In 2006, economist David Galenson at the University of Chicago spent years studying when people produce their greatest work. He found 2 distinct patterns. Conceptual innovators, Mozart, Picasso, Zuckerberg, peak early. They arrive with a clear vision and execute it before the world tells them it's impossible. Experimental innovators, Van Gogh, Darwin, Twain, peak late. They accumulate, they fail, they revise, and then they produce something no early peak could have built. His conclusion, the 2 types don't compete. They operate on completely different timelines. The world celebrates the early peak because it's more visible. The late peak is quieter, and it tends to last longer. 3 reasons why. Chapter 1. The accumulation effect. Here is something that seems obvious, but changes everything once you see it. Learning is never starting from zero. Every new piece of information needs something to attach to. A hook, a context, a prior experience that says, this connects to that. When you're 17 and learning economics for the first time, you have almost no hooks. The concepts float. They connect to nothing you've lived. They're technically stored but practically inaccessible. When you're 32 and learning the same material, you've watched companies succeed and fail. You've been underpaid. You've negotiated. You've seen a market move. Every concept in that economics textbook immediately finds a hook in your life. It doesn't float. It lands. Psychologist John Sweller spent decades studying what he called cognitive load, the amount of mental effort required to process new information. His finding, prior knowledge doesn't just help, it fundamentally changes the architecture of learning. Experts don't learn faster because they're smarter. They learn faster because they have more hooks. Late bloomers have been building hooks for years. Without knowing it, every job, every failure, every relationship, everything you tried and it didn't work, all of it is infrastructure for the thing you haven't learned yet. Chapter 2. The metacognition edge. Early learners make 2 mistakes at once. They're discovering how they learn. At the same time as they're trying to master the content, they don't know when their brain is actually encoding versus when it's just recognizing. They don't know how they perform under pressure. They don't know which conditions make them retain more and which make them lose everything. They're figuring out the instrument while trying to play the concert. Late bloomers have failed before. They know what doesn't work. They know when they're fooling themselves. They know what the moment of actual understanding feels like because they've had to find it without anyone telling them how. This is called metacognition, the ability to observe your own thinking and adjust it in real time. Psychologist John Flavel, who coined the term in the 1970s, found that metacognition is one of the strongest predictors of academic and professional performance, stronger than IQ, and it develops through experience, not talent, not age, experience. Every time you've studied something and failed to retain it, and then figured out why, you were building metacognition. Every early learner is starting that process now. You finished it years ago. Chapter 3. The intrinsic signal. Early learners study what they're assigned. Late bloomers study what they chose. That difference is not cosmetic. Researchers Edward Deci and Richard Ryan spent decades studying what they called self-determination theory, their central finding. Information learned for intrinsic reasons, because you chose it, because it matters to you, is retained at a fundamentally different level than information learned for external reasons, grades, approval, obligation. Extrinsic motivation gets information in. It does not get it to stay. Think about everything you've learned, because you genuinely needed to know it. A skill that solved a real problem, a subject you found at the exact moment it mattered, something you pursued because not knowing it was no longer acceptable. That material is still there, years later, under pressure, without reviewing. Now think about everything you learned for a grade. This is not a personal failure. This is how the brain processes signal versus noise. Chosen information is signal. Assigned information is noise. Late bloomers almost always study signal. Because by the time you're choosing to learn something, at 30 or 40 or 65, you're not doing it for a grade, you're doing it because it matters. And the brain keeps what matters. Van Gogh didn't produce masterpieces. Despite having only 10 years, he produced them because of everything that came before those 10 years. The infrastructure was already built. The metacognition was already sharp. The signal was already real. He didn't start late. He started exactly when the conditions were right. You haven't missed anything. You've been building the hooks for the thing you haven't learned yet. The late start is not the obstacle. The late start is the advantage. But here's the problem. Infrastructure, metacognition, intrinsic signal. None of it matters if you sit down to learn, and your phone is open next to you. The advantage late bloomers have gets erased in 30 seconds of distraction. That's why I made this video on exactly how to protect your focus long enough for the advantages you've built to actually work. Watch it next.